Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to do something a bit different here. So for the last 11 videos, I've been doing Fallout. But I'm going to go back to something I did previously and looking at weird, absurd people in the world that has lived in the past and that lives now. So if you do like this type of content and you have a suggestion of a crazy person I can read about and then present to you, please tell me. So I'd like to ask a question. What is the origin of language? Today we have the dialectical evolutionary side of language, which is a language formed over time. There's no origin or anything of that. But previously, it was actually very common to think of one origin of language. And the answer to the origin of language is right here. Finnish. Yes, the first language ever spoken is Finnish.
Perkele, siihen koske, saatana vie.
And this makes sense, doesn't it? You see, if you look at Egypt, if you look at writing in Egypt, it's very similar to Finnish, yeah? So that means the Egyptian civilization and the Finnish civilization are connected, yes? Well, this is what a man called Sigurd Wettenhovi-Aspa believed. He's the creator of something called Egyptology. It means that the Finnish language and the Egyptian language are related, which means the original language is Finnish. Let's look at it. It makes sense, you see? So, before the Indo-European migration westwards, there were civilizations in Europe, you see, and all of them are Finnish, yeah? But it was after the big war that it changed, you know? So you have the Finnish, and you have the Koreans, and you have this like Finnish-Korean hyperwar. It makes sense, doesn't it? Ooh. His arguments are laid out in his book called Kalevala Ja, which more or less goes into the details that Egyptian language and Finnish language in written form is very similar. It has sort of the same pronunciation of words. Therefore, it must mean they are related, right? Well, no. He also goes into the detail that all other languages in the world are related to Finnish, because, original language is Finnish. As, for example, here in an Irish version, how perkele and castle and you name it are the same. It's a stretch. But you think probably now, this is just some nobody crazy man in the forest, why do we care? Well, I mean, he wasn't a nobody. His ideas are questionable, but he was an artist, he was a writer, he was a poet. And he actually had connections with, during the time, Sweden's most famous poet, August Strindberg, which every Swede knows about, every Swede have read, and they were pen pals. They even actually met each other in Paris, if I'm correct. And these two actually have gone into details about origin of language and kind of debated each other on this topic. August Strindberg believes the origin of language is Hebrew. Why? Well, Garden of Eden, God. And Adam and Eve must have spoken Hebrew because God chose his people. Therefore, it must be Hebrew. Well, this guy goes into more detail looking at language itself and written form and says it's Finnish. They don't agree, obviously. I found out about Aspa because a friend played Redflood mod on HoI4, and I recommend you playing it too. Redflood. It has weird people in it, and that's the fun part of it. And Aspa here can take over Finland, and he can create the black and red lamps, which combines Finland and Egypt together, because they are connected. Aspa was an ultranationalist, and not just an ultranationalist sense that we don't want Russians to control us. No, this man wanted to unite the former Finnish people, which means uniting with Egypt, as we talked about before. It's a weird esoteric ultranationalism. I also want to go into one thing before we cancel this chapter here. He's inspired by occultism, that's another statement. And he is a Freemason. And back in early time, Egyptology was a very weird field. Egyptology was something you weren't back then. Because, yeah, you had the archaeologists who were Egyptologists. That's fine. They're usually fine. But then you had the occultist parts. They were the Egyptologists. And then they didn't really make no sense now, did they? They worshipped the gods. They saw the Egypt gods because it was new, it was fresh. Not much was known about Egypt during the time, ancient Egypt during the time. So everybody created weird folk tales and weird, I don't know, stories about this. And he wasn't the exception. He did that exact thing. And I can tell you, there's a lot of occultists that are really weird with Egypt. So he's just one of the bunch. But he's a crazy bastard. And he's an interesting bastard. On that, I got nothing really to say. I recommend reading a little bit about him, but this linguistic cult, like tradition of his, that didn't survive very long. So I will end it with this. Misa, ma, maka.